What if you could sit across from Phil Ivey and ask him one question? Not about ranges, not about bet sizing, not about GTO. One question about the single skill that separates him from every other player alive. What if you could sit with Doyle Brunson and ask him the same question, and then And by the end of this video, you are going to know how to steal every single one of them. Here is the list we are working from: Phil Ivey, Doyle Brunson, Stu Ungar, Daniel Negreanu, Phil Hellmuth, Fedor Holz, Vanessa Selbst, Johnny Moss, Erik Seidel, Tom Dwan. 10 players, 10 completely different edges, 10 skills that between them cover every dimension of what it means to be an elite poker player. These are not the same skill expressed in different ways. They are genuinely different weapons, built by genuinely different minds, in genuinely different eras of the game. And the extraordinary thing is that none of them are locked inside those people. Every single one of them is learnable. Every single one of them is available to you. The only question is whether you know what you are looking for. After today, you will. Stay with me. This is the most valuable poker education available anywhere. Skill 1. Phil Ivey, the iron mind under any pressure. Phil Ivey holds 11 WSOP bracelets. He has won tens of millions in both tournaments and cash games. He is widely considered the greatest overall poker player who ever lived. But here is what almost nobody talks about when they discuss Phil Ivey. The skill that made him great is not technical. It is psychological. Ivey himself has described it as the ability to treat every single hand as if it is the first hand of the session, regardless of what happened before it. No accumulated frustration, no carried momentum, no ego involved in any decision. Complete reset between every hand, as if the previous hand never existed. There is a documented moment that captures this perfectly. Ivey was playing in a high-stakes cash game and lost a pot worth several $100,000 on a bad beat, in a spot where he was an enormous favorite. The players at the table described what happened next as one of the most remarkable things they had ever witnessed in poker. Ivey sat back, looked at the felt for approximately 3 seconds, and then began playing the next hand with the exact same energy and focus as the hand before the loss. No visible reaction, no change in tempo, no tightening of the jaw, complete absence of the emotional residue that destroys most players for 30 minutes after an equivalent loss. Neuroscience tells us what Ivey had trained himself to do. He had built what researchers call emotional reset architecture, a set of practiced responses that activate the parasympathetic nervous system within seconds of a stressful event, restoring the prefrontal cortex to baseline function before the next decision arrives. Most players take 20 to 30 minutes to recover from a significant bad beat. Ivey recovered in 3 seconds. That gap in recovery time is not a personality difference. It is a trained skill. Here is how you steal this skill. After every significant hand, whether you won or lost, you perform a 3-breath reset before picking up your cards for the next hand. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out. 3 cycles. This takes 36 seconds, and it activates the same parasympathetic response that Ivey had trained to happen automatically. Do this for 60 sessions, and it becomes automatic. This is the iron mind. This is what separates Ivey from everyone else, and now it can be yours. Skill 2. Doyle Brunson, the art of controlled aggression. Doyle Brunson won the WSOP Main Event in 1976 and 1977 with the same hand, 10-2 offsuit. Both times. The hand is now called the Brunson hand in his honor. But those 2 victories, as remarkable as they are not the reason Brunson is considered the godfather of modern poker. The reason is a book he wrote in 1979 called Super System that fundamentally changed how an entire generation of players understood the game. Daniel Negreanu, who has been playing against the best in the world for 30 years, described Brunson as the bridge between history and today. Without Doyle, there is no modern poker as we know it. The specific skill you are stealing from Brunson is controlled aggression. Not random aggression, not reckless aggression. Controlled, deliberate, surgically applied pressure that forces opponents into decisions they are not prepared to make. Brunson understood, decades before solvers confirmed it, that poker is fundamentally a game of making your opponent uncomfortable. The player who is comfortable at the table is the player who is playing their best game. The player who is uncomfortable is the player making mistakes. Brunson's entire approach was built around identifying who was comfortable and immediately targeting that comfort with pressure until the mistakes appeared. Here is the practical application. At the beginning of every session, before you play a single hand, you identify the two players at your table who appear most comfortable. These are your primary aggression targets for the session. Not the players who are playing badly, the players who appear settled and at ease. Because comfortable players have developed a routine that works for them, and aggression breaks routines. Once their routine is broken, the mistakes follow automatically. Brunson also established a principle that every great player since has confirmed. In poker, the person who applies pressure controls the hand. The person responding to pressure is always at a disadvantage regardless of their cards. So apply first, respond never. That one principle, internalized and executed consistently, is worth more than 1,000 hours of solver work. Skill 3. Stu Ungar, the photographic read. Stu Ungar is the only player in WSOP history besides Johnny Moss to win the main event 3 times, 1980, 1981, and 1997. He died in a Las Vegas hotel room in 1998 at 45 years old, virtually penniless. The greatest pure talent the game has ever seen, destroyed by addiction. His 1997 comeback win is one of the most devastating stories in all of poker. He showed up looking visibly unwell, borrowed money for the entry, and proceeded to outplay an entire field of the best players in the world as if the intervening years had never happened. What made Ungar different from every other player in his era was not aggression, not mathematical precision, not bankroll management. It was memory. Ungar had what multiple players who competed against him described as a photographic memory for every card that had been played at the table. He was tracking every piece of visible information in real time with a precision that his opponents could not match. And he was running this tracking system continuously while simultaneously reading physical tells, calculating odds, and applying pressure. Players who competed against him in the 1980s described facing him as feeling like he already knew what you were going to do before you did it. The skill you steal from Ungar is systematic information tracking. In every hand you play, you are going to track one thing that most players ignore completely: the folded cards. When players fold in early positions, what did their pre-fold behavior tell you about range? When the player to your right folded instantly, what does that suggest about what is still live in the deck? This information is available to every player at the table, and almost none of them use it. Building a systematic habit of tracking and cataloging folded card information adds a layer of decision quality to every pot you enter that your opponents are not accessing. It is a free edge hiding in plain sight at every table you ever sit at. Skill 4. Daniel Negreanu, the human read. Daniel Negreanu has 6 WSOP bracelets and 2 World Series of Poker Player of the Year awards. He is the most popular poker player who ever lived by almost any metric of public engagement. But none of that explains the specific skill that made him elite. What made Negreanu elite is the ability to tell you what cards his opponent has before the river is dealt, with an accuracy that consistently defied statistical probability. He has done this on camera hundreds of times, calling out specific hands with specific precision at moments when such precision should be impossible. This is not psychic ability. It is the result of what Negreanu himself has called player profiling carried to its ultimate expression. Negreanu studies the human being across the table from him with the same depth and attention that other players study hand histories. He tracks personality type, emotional state, how the player behaves under different types of pressure, what their betting patterns reveal about their confidence level in any given moment, and how all of these variables combine to narrow the range of what they can be holding. The practical skill you steal from Negreanu requires one change in how you approach a session. Before you think about what cards to play, spend the first 2 orbits doing nothing but building a profile of each player at your table. Not a technical profile, a human profile. What is this person afraid of? What are they trying to prove? Are they here to gamble or are they here to perform? Are they comfortable or anxious? Are they results-oriented or process-oriented? These questions, answered through observation in the first 15 minutes of a session, give you a framework for every decision you make for the rest of that session. The cards tell you the mathematics. The human profile tells you what the mathematics actually means in this specific situation against this specific person right now. Skill 5. Phil Hellmuth, the pattern exploit. Before we go further, I want to make sure you have access to the complete system behind everything in this video. The 10 skills you are learning right now are components of a framework that the Collection 2 ebooks expand into full practical protocols, with exercises, session-by-session implementation guides, and real-hand examples for every situation. 10 ebooks plus 5 premium bonus ebooks, $29.89 for everything. Scan the Collection 2 QR code on screen right now and join Phenom Poker through the link in the pinned comment. Make your first deposit, get a 200% bonus up to 4,000 USDT, then email junior.placas@outlook.com with your deposit screenshot, and Collection 1 arrives in your inbox completely free. Now, let us keep going, because we are halfway through 10 of the greatest skills in poker history. Phil Hellmuth has 17 WSOP bracelets, more than any player in history. He has also won both the Las Vegas and European WSOP main events, the only player ever to accomplish this. He is famously emotional at the table in ways that have generated 10,000 highlight clips and 10 million opinions about his character. But here is what the opinions miss. Hellmuth understands something about his opponents that the GTO generation has largely forgotten. He understands that human beings playing poker are not random number generators. They are creatures of habit who repeat the same patterns under pressure with remarkable consistency. And he has built his entire game around recognizing those patterns and exploiting them without mercy. Hellmuth once described his approach as white magic, the ability to read opponents so precisely that he can predict their behavior before they act. This sounds mystical until you understand the mechanism. He is not reading minds. He is cataloging behavioral patterns and running them against an internal database of thousands of players he has faced over decades. When an opponent in a specific spot with a specific bet sizing history acts in a specific way, Hellmuth has seen enough versions of that pattern to know with high confidence what it means. The skill you steal from Hellmuth is pattern banking. After every session, you document one specific behavioral pattern you observed in an opponent. Not a technical pattern, a human pattern. How did the player respond to aggression when short-stacked versus when deep? Did they tighten up when losing or open up? Did their bet sizing change when they were bluffing versus value betting in ways that were consistent? Over 50 sessions of systematic pattern banking, you will build a personal database of human behavioral signatures that no solver can replicate. And every player type you add to that database makes you more dangerous against every similar player you face in the future. Skill 6. Fedor Holz, the system builder. Fedor Holz is 30 years old and has accumulated over $47 million in live tournament earnings. He became #1 in the world by his mid-20s. He quit school and moved to Vienna at 19 with no guarantee that the decision would work. By 20, he was running a staking operation, backing and developing other players while simultaneously competing at the highest level himself. His combination of technical mastery, mental game discipline, and systematic approach to improvement represents the most complete modern blueprint for building a career at this game. The specific skill you steal from Holz is what he has called the feedback loop obsession. Holz is documented to have reviewed every significant session with a level of systematic objectivity that his peers described as machine-like. Not reviewing for bad beats or lucky wins, reviewing for the quality of the decision process independent of the outcome. He built a personal rating system for his own decisions that tracked not whether he won the pot, but whether the reasoning that produced the decision was sound. Over time, this system gave him an uncompromisingly accurate picture of where his game was strong and where it was weak. And because the picture was accurate, the improvements he made were targeted at the actual leaks rather than the ones his ego preferred to address. Here is the specific protocol. After every session, before you close the laptop or leave the casino, you identify 3 hands. Not the biggest pots, not the worst beats. The 3 hands where your decision process felt least certain. Where you were not sure whether you made the best decision or whether you just got lucky with an outcome that could have gone either way. These 3 hands are your session review. You analyze the decision process only, not the result. And you ask one question for each hand. If I face this exact situation 100 times, is the process I use the one that produces the best outcomes over the long run? This is how Holz built one of the most technically precise games in the history of the sport. This is how you start building yours. Skill 7. Vanessa Selbst, the analytical aggressor. Vanessa Selbst won 3 WSOP bracelets and accumulated over $11 million in tournament earnings, making her the most successful female poker player in history. She graduated from Yale Law School while competing at the highest levels of the game. She is one of the most analytically gifted players who ever sat at a poker table. And the specific skill that made her elite is something that the modern GTO community talks about constantly, but rarely executes well: aggressive range construction. Most players play aggressively with their strong hands and passively with their medium hands. Selbst recognized before most that this pattern is exploitable in a way that costs enormous amounts of equity over time. She built what researchers who have studied her hand histories call an asymmetric aggression model, meaning she applied pressure not just when she had strong hands, but when the board texture and her range advantage combined to make aggression the highest expected value action, regardless of her specific holding. This made her ranges genuinely balanced in a way that most players achieve in theory but not in practice. Here is the skill you steal from Selbst. Identify one spot in your game where you are consistently passive when the range advantage belongs to you. This is typically a position or board texture where you know theoretically that you should be betting more frequently but default to checking because it feels safer. Every session, you commit to betting in that specific spot at least twice more than your comfort level suggests. Not because you always have the hand, because your range advantage in that spot makes aggression correct, regardless of your specific holding. This is how you build the kind of balanced aggression that makes your betting patterns impossible to exploit over time. Skill 8. Johnny Moss and Erik Seidel, the foundation and the long game. Johnny Moss was the first player ever voted champion of the World Series of Poker in 1970. His peers, the greatest players of his generation, unanimously selected him as the best among them. He won 9 WSOP bracelets over a career that spanned decades. His most famous exploit was a 5-month heads-up marathon against a gambler known as Nick the Greek, orchestrated by casino owner Benny Binion in 1949. Nick the Greek lost somewhere between $2 and $4 million in that single extended session, finally conceding with the line that has become one of the most famous in poker history. "Mr. Moss, I have to let you go." The skill you steal from Johnny Moss is patience weaponized. Moss understood that poker is not a sprint. It is not even a marathon. It is a long-form strategic extraction that rewards the player who can maintain discipline and focus over periods of time that would break most people's concentration. In a game that lasts 5 months, the player who gets bored and starts making mistakes loses everything they accumulated with discipline. Moss never got bored. He never tilted. He never adjusted his standard of play downward because the session was going well or poorly. He simply played the right play every time it was available, for as long as it took for the results to reflect that discipline. Erik Seidel has 9 WSOP bracelets and over $36 million in career earnings across 4 decades of elite competition. He is one of the few players in history to have competed at the very highest level of the game across multiple eras without a significant gap in results. The skill you steal from Seidel is adaptive evolution. Seidel has continuously updated his game as the theoretical landscape changed. He did not defend what worked in 2000 against what works in 2026. He studied, adapted, and maintained relevance in a game that has changed more in the last decade than in the previous 5 combined. The player who builds a game and then defends it against change will eventually be left behind. The player who treats their game as a permanent construction project that never finishes has no ceiling. Skill 9. Tom Dwan, the Fear Factory. Tom Dwan is worth discussing last among the 10 because his specific contribution to the game is unlike anything anyone else on this list brought. Dwan became famous in the high-stakes poker era of televised cash games in the mid-2000s. For a style so relentlessly aggressive and so deeply uncomfortable for opponents that experienced professionals, players who had been competing for decades at the highest levels, visibly became uncertain of themselves at tables with him present. Dwan did not have better cards than his opponents. He did not have superior mathematical models. What he had was the ability to make other people doubt themselves at a frequency and intensity that most players never experience and do not know how to process. He would 4-bet with holdings that made no theoretical sense, follow through with enormous turn bets on boards that connected with nothing in his range, and maintain the physical and psychological composure of someone who was executing a calculated plan regardless of the actual contents of his hand. The result was that facing Dwan became something that experienced players dreaded in a way that had nothing to do with the cards. The skill you steal from Dwan is what game theorists call strategic intimidation. Not physical intimidation, strategic. The consistent willingness to apply pressure in spots where the mathematical expectation is borderline, but the psychological pressure is enormous. The player who demonstrates early in a session that they are willing to commit large amounts of chips in uncomfortable spots creates a lasting impression in the minds of their opponents that influences every subsequent decision those opponents make. They start making slightly more conservative decisions to avoid confrontation. They start folding hands they should call. They start calling hands they should raise. 1 or 2 early large aggressive actions, executed with complete composure regardless of outcome, can alter the entire strategic landscape of a table for hours. Here is where we close the loop on something that has been building across all 10 of these legends. Ivey's Iron Mind, Brunson's Controlled Aggression, Ungar's Photographic Read, Negreanu's Human Profiling, Hellmuth's Pattern Banking, Holz's Feedback Loop Obsession, Selbst's Asymmetric Aggression, Moss's Weaponized Patience, Seidel's Adaptive Evolution, Dwan's Strategic Intimidation. 10 skills, 10 completely different edges, 10 weapons that between them cover every dimension of what it means to be genuinely dangerous at a poker table. Here is what is extraordinary about this list. None of these 10 players built their edge from the same thing. Ivey and Hellmuth have almost nothing in common strategically. Ungar and Selbst built completely different models of what good poker looks like. Dwan and Moss represent approaches to the game that are almost philosophically opposite. And yet every single one of them won at the highest level of the game in their era. Because there is no single correct way to be great at poker. There are 10 ways, at least. And you do not have to choose only one. The most dangerous player at any table is not the one who has mastered a single skill. It is the one who has layered multiple skills into a system that is genuinely difficult to categorize. When opponents cannot categorize you, they cannot build a reliable model of you. And when they cannot build a reliable model of you, every decision they make against you carries more uncertainty than it should. That uncertainty costs them equity on every single hand. Over a tournament or a session or a career, that accumulated uncertainty is worth an enormous amount of chips. You just received 10 weapons from the 10 greatest minds in poker history. You now know specifically what each of them built, why it worked, and exactly how to begin installing it into your own game. What you do with that information is the only thing that separates you from the player you are right now from the player you are capable of becoming. The complete implementation system for all 10 skills, the exercises, the session protocols, the progressive training plan that builds these weapons into your game, one by one, over the course of a complete training cycle, is inside Collection 2. 10 ebooks and 5 premium bonus ebooks. $29.89 for the system that takes everything you just learned and turns it from knowledge into skill. Scan the QR code on screen right now. The link is in the pinned comment. And when you are ready to sit down at a real table and test what you have built, join Phenom Poker. Player-owned platform backed by Victor Blom, Brian Rast, and Daniel Cates. Sign up through the link in the pinned comment. Make your first deposit. Get 200% bonus up to 4,000 USDT. Then email me at junior.placas@outlook.com with your deposit screenshot, and Collection 1 comes to your inbox completely free, immediately, no catch. Subscribe to this channel right now if this video delivered what it promised. Every week we go deeper into the game above the game. The neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, and strategy that the greatest players in history actually used to build their edge. Not highlights, not opinions, the actual mechanisms of greatness, extracted and made available to anyone willing to do the work. Share this video with one player who is serious about improving. Not because it helps the channel, because they just received 10 weapons from the 10 greatest poker players who ever lived, and they deserve to know it. 10 legends, 10 weapons, one player who now knows how to steal all of them. That player is you.